Hey, nerd.
Hello. Nerds. Talking about us for those of you hanging out waiting for the webinar to start, not you. Thank God it's Friday.
Right.
By the way, while we're waiting to get started, for those of you already in the waiting room or in the meeting, totally hoping all the demo in this webinar doesn't bomb, because it's like a general rule you don't deploy squat on Friday afternoon. So hopefully it doesn't all break. That would be hilarious if it did, but I guess I can always pull up a YouTube video of it running. I was just asking Gordon if he was going to be attending because it's like later there, and that's him messaging me on the other screen, which I should probably turn off notifications on because sometimes he sends me really funny stuff. Just going to wait another minute because it's not quite 2 o'clock yet here, according to whichever clock I'm looking at. $9 p.m. in Germany. Nice. Friday night. Friday night for us is pizza night. So after this demo, got to get a few more things done and then get some pizza. Okay, well, we can get going since it's 2 o'clock, and if more people show up, cool. And if not, we've got Otter recording this, so people can always play it back on YouTube a little later. So my name's Aaron Maller from Parallax team. This is going to be a kind of a brief and informal explanation of what we're doing with pragmatic praxis rollout tools for rolling out software to computers. The backstory for today's webinar, if you didn't see it on Twitter, is that we actually have somebody new starting in a couple of weeks. So we have 2 new machines that have to get all their software deployed. And so every time we have to do that, or when it's like time to do a yearly release, that's always a cool time to jump back in and show folks how we do it using the PX tools that are made by Gordon Price from Revit Forum and Twitter and wherever else you may follow Gordon. So we'll just jump into it. We are going to do some PowerPoint slides just for a few minutes, but actually I almost forgot. Before we do that, we're going to start a live machine. And this isn't one of the new machines. Obviously, this is just a virtual machine. But just to show you what we're going to do really quick, this is a bare computer. It's got no Autodesk software on it whatsoever. We're not going to do our full office deployment because it takes like several hours to finish. So it wouldn't be done by the time the webinar is over unless you guys really want to hang out for a long time. But what we can do is, in the time that I'm showing you everything that we want to talk about, it will basically finish all of Revit 2021 and AutoCAD 2021 just so we can look at it. And we'll talk about what I mean by finish, because I don't just mean deploying Revit and AutoCAD, because that would be silly. So we're going to just tell it to use this setup called the VM demo. And I'm gonna talk about what this is all doing while it's running in the background. So we're not gonna just sit here and watch this. We'll just let it get started, and then I'll come back and explain what this all is in a little bit. So that's off to the races. Because I'm superstitious, I always let it finish a task before I close it. Okay, so we'll let that run, and we'll come back in a little bit. So yeah, if you don't know who we are, Parallax team, there's currently 3.5 of us because like I just said a minute ago, somebody new is starting in a few weeks. Myself, John Pearson, Melissa Thiesens, we're all the group that does all kinds of fun stuff BIM implementation wise. I nerd out the most on the deployment stuff just because I always, in my past jobs, have always been stuck doing the actual deployments. So what we're going to talk about today is a series of tools called Pragmatic Praxis. They're made by Gordon Price. That's Gordon's company. If you haven't used them before, you can go to the website, pragmaticpraxis.com. If Gordon does watch this webinar later, or if he does tune in live, I'm not knocking him, but the website is absolutely brutal because it's a wall of text. Because there is a lot of text involved in this topic. So the reason I like to point that out to people who are listening to the webinar is like, don't get turned off if you look at the website and it's just like wall to wall data and text, because that's really what deployments are. There are a lot of deployment tools on the market. There's PX tools, there's PDQ, there's SCCM, and then there's a lot of things that like specifically the IT groups are using. There's Intune, and there's a bunch of other stuff. Autodesk software is very picky. A lot of the AEC software is. So there's definitely a reason that we ended up using PX tools, and we'll kind of dive into that through the rest of the webinar. So let's see here. Okay, so basically every year when you're rolling out software, let's say, in 5 months or 6 months, 2022 is going to come out from Autodesk. And if we're not all still locked up at home, we might go to actually install software. And hold on one second, because apparently, oh, okay, he's got a link. Okay, so things that you need to do year to year when you want to deploy Autodesk software. And it's not just Autodesk, by the way. We're going to talk about Bluebeam and some other software as well. But I mean, the first step is you actually need to build the software deployments. And that process varies based on who the software manufacturer is. And we may talk about that a little bit today as well. But the big thing that we're going to talk about is, depending on where you work or who's responsible for your practice technology software, it's not just actually installing the software. There's updates, point releases, hot fixes, third-party add-ins, and a whole series of customizations. And that's a big thing that I try to explain to the IT departments of a lot of architecture and engineering firms. Is simply downloading the Autodesk Revit installer and running it on a computer does not check the box for installing Revit. I consider Revit not really functional at that point, because there's a lot of other things I want in Revit, or it's not really worth the hassle of having IT install it at that point. And there's also a concept that we're going to talk about that is really from the AutoCAD days, but it is relevant for things like Revit and Bluebeam and Enscape and Dynamo and a bunch of other software. And that's what they used to call bootstrapping in AutoCAD. So we're going to get into that a little bit because it's something PX Tools handles really well, and we need to do it to get our software configured the way we want. And then we need to compile all this stuff together and have it happen automatically, because the last thing we want to be doing is double clicking 15,000 things for every piece of software. So this is just a list of things that I think you need if you are the person responsible for deployments. And I'm not sure, looking at the attendee list, we've got a wide range of people here in terms of who's actually responsible for the deployments themselves versus who's not. But what I do recommend is, hopefully at this point, all of us are on Windows 10 and there's no Windows 7 holdouts. If you're on Windows 10, you basically have access to Hyper-V. It's free. Hyper-V is this nerdy little window that pops up, and you can stand up virtual computers inside Hyper-V, and your virtual computers look like this thing we were playing with a minute ago. The downside is, to do this legitimately, you do have to have extra Windows licenses, but that's really the only cost. If you're working or responsible for deployments, having virtualization is like a must, because you want to be able to test your deployment and then completely scrap the computer immediately after. And I'm sure those of you on the webinar already know, like, uninstalling Revit is not the same as scrapping the computer, because With Autodesk, you uninstall it. It's like 50-50, you'll never get it installed again. So you want to be able to just try the install, blow it away, try the install, blow it away. By the way, when I say I use Hyper-V for this, it doesn't mean that Hyper-V is my preference. Hyper-V is free if you have Windows 10. You just have to buy another Windows license for the virtual machine itself. So that puts the price of a virtual machine at like $150 tops. So like in this case here, I've got 3 virtual machines, 3 extra licenses of Windows. There's no price, there's no cost for Hyper-V itself. You can get into some nicer hypervisors like VMware, but you're going to pay a decent amount of money for those. The next thing that we're going to do today, or the next tool that we're going to use, is you need to have a text editor that's not, extremely basic. I use Notepad++. This is how mine looks. That was one of my kiddos screaming in the background. That's fun. So we're going to get into this in a little bit. If you're working on deployments, you're going to spend a ton of time in a text editor, whether or not it's Notepad++ or regular Notepad, or if you want to use the basic editor that's inside Visual Studio. Somebody brought that up a couple of weeks ago. I recommend getting a good text editor that you like. I really like Notepad++. Plus you can colorize it and have themes set up that help you with where your brackets are and everything like that. So we'll dive into that a little later. And the last thing that you're going to need, and we're not going to talk about AutoCAD a ton, but I'll show you why the bootstrapping philosophy is important. And we're going to talk about it more in relation to like Revit and Dynamo. But if you do need to deploy AutoCAD, so I mean, the PX tools will help you do the bootstrapping, which is amazing. But if you write down those 2 numbers in red right there, those are 2 classes that Bob Bell taught like literally over a decade ago. And I still use those 2 handouts every year because they go step by step through the CUIX creation and the bootstrapping how-tos and all that kind of good stuff. So they're handy to look at. Bob Bell's awesome. And then, so if you're going to deploy, the other thing that you need is a plan. And that sounds kind of obtuse, but there's a lot that's going to go into this talk just in terms of basic organization and where you store things and how people path to things and how computers access things. And you really want to keep things repetitive and similar year after year. That's harder to do in some firms than others, but it's just good to know. Okay, so here we're going to start. Basic premise that we want to talk about first is, what do we consider actually deploying Revit? And I want to bring this up again because, I mean, we work with a lot of architects, a lot of engineers, a lot of contractors, but we also work with a lot of IT folks because they are necessary for what we do. And we love working with them. And it's not their fault that they're not in Revit every day. Like, their job is to keep the lights on, keep the servers running, and it's a very different world than we live in. So the trouble is, a lot of the times if you ask them, what does it mean to actually deploy Revit, they'll say, okay, well, we might need to yank an earlier version, possibly with Revit, not always the case. Then we want to run the Autodesk deployment. The last time we did this webinar, like 5 months ago, we spent a lot of time on actually building the Autodesk deployments, and we'll get into that a little bit today, but I'm going to I want to talk more about the PX tools today. So we're going to assume that you know how to run the deployment creator, build a Revit deployment or a Navisworks or an AutoCAD deployment, get it on your server, and then just double click the shortcut if you wanted to run it. That does have a little asterisk on it at this point in the year, because I'm not sure if you're all aware who are watching that Revit mid-year got switched to the new deployment method. And what I mean by new is, there's always been the deployment builder. You download the massive EXE, you double click it, it unpacks into C Autodesk, and then you get the build a deployment dialog. That's now gone from Revit. Now, if you download Revit, all you get is the single machine installer. If you want to build a deployment for Revit, you now have to do it through the manage.autodesk.com portal. You configure the deployment in that web page, and then you hit download, and it downloads it to the server. That change happened to 3D Studio Max and Maya last year, and it happened to Revit in the middle of this year. We imagine it's going to happen to the rest of Autodesk software in the next couple of years. It's worth noting that sucks, because the new method, while it could be cool in the future, once it gets fully fleshed out, some of the things that we do in the old deployments are not yet possible in the new deployments. And we'll kind of get into that in a little bit. Anyways, back to our typical, what does it mean to deploy Revit? Uninstall a version, install the new one, shove a custom INI in there. A lot of firms will call that done, and they'll say Revit's deployed. Now, unfortunately, for us, this is pretty basic entry level. It doesn't really count because most firms these days are not just using bare Revit, if you will. So for us, it means we might need to uninstall an old version. We definitely need to run the deployment. Then we also need to manage all of the point releases for all of the different years that we have deployed. In addition, there's some behind the scenes stuff that we're going to talk about that's just kind of icky that we have to deal with. And yes, we will want to deploy a custom INI. Then we'll want to kill the Autodesk desktop app. Me specifically, I want to automatically GIMP the Autodesk materials so they don't show up. Now, not their render assets, mind you. I've got no problem with the render assets, but when you install Revit out of the box, there's a material called glass, just GLASS. I find that to not be very usable in architecture because is it insulated glass? Is it non-insulated? Is it tempered? Is it spandrel? Is it glass 1? Is it glass 2? So I don't want anybody to have the option to just put glass in a building. So I'm an authoritarian. I like to GIMP the Autodesk materials so they don't work. If you've seen on Twitter, I do the custom icons because they apparently fired everybody who made the different icons year after year. So now they're all the same. And there's also the places dialog. And I want to be clear about the places dialog. What we're talking about is this thing over here in the file open menu. Now, you can do that in the Revit INI, but you can't do it like this in the Revit INI. So you'll notice that like a lot of the little goofy extra buttons that show up, like I forget what they're called even, but if you do it in the Revit INI, there'll be 4 or 5 of these things from your computer instead of just my computer, my network places. So if you do it our way, there is a method to streamline places and put things where you want. But we also want to, customize material UI config XML. It's a local file that keeps track of the UI state of your material library. So when I open my material library, it's in text list. It's not trying to render those little 64 pixel wide images because that just slows everything down even more. So you can customize that. And you can also roll out custom keyboard shortcuts. So this list is obviously longer than the last slide where we only had 3 things to look at. And here's the really scary thing. That's the first half of the list. Because the other thing that we need to talk about is if you're using Revit in 2020, chances are you've got a bunch of third-party stuff that's got to go over the top of it. So it's a huge one. I mean, if you're using Dynamo, packages have to be managed somehow on your computers. Some folks are repathing their Dynamo to a server. That works some of the time. It will have a performance impact, but then also you get into if somebody tries to overwrite the package while you're in there, it's kind of bad news. And also, I've heard stories of like the actual packages themselves aren't always guaranteed to work if the package location is non-standard. I'm not a Dynamo expert. I would defer to somebody like John Pearson for that. But all that said, there's a way to handle your packages where they all stay in the default location and they get updated every day. So we'll talk about that. And then there is, of course, any of the apps that you install to use in Revit. So for us, that's Family Browser R3, all 3 CTC suites, or 3 of the 4 CTCs. I left one out. We have a bunch of apps internally that we use, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 apps. Parley Burnett's preview image generator, Rhino Inside, of course, if you have Rhino 7 work in progress installed. Revit Lookup, View Filter Manager, PyRevit, of course, you got to have PyRevit, Keynote Manager, BIM-Track, some interop tools, and of course, Enscape. So this is what I would consider the baseline for getting Revit installed. So it's something like 25, 30 installers that you need to run. And I want to be clear, like Revit is not the only high maintenance software that we have in the mix. So AutoCAD has its own bizarre special needs, and this goes back to Bob Bell's files on bootstrapping. But you know, AutoCAD is very particular because the shortcuts are actually special, and they call particular profiles, which are ARGs, and those profiles call CUIX files, and all of that depends on having files on your computer. It's a whole thing. And Navisworks, you don't really need to customize, but if you've been using Navisworks for a number of years, like you can make your own customized workspace, which is basically just a customized UI. And you can have more than one workspace. You can have actual collision detection. You can have view mode, but there's no way to deploy them other than shoving files on the computers. Similarly, you can edit your keyboard shortcuts in Navisworks. Most people don't know that. But it's in a non-standard location. So it's not in app data like it's supposed to be. It's actually in the middle of the freaking application, which is kind of funny. So there's more stuff to talk about there. Bluebeam review, same exact thing. You can have customized palettes, you can have customized stamps, custom profiles for different types of work that you may do, and all of that you want to be able to customize when you're rolling it out as well. And then we get into like a whole bunch of specialty software that over the years we've had to deploy, and some of it is a royal pain in the ass. We recently had to roll out the Unreal gaming engine for an architecture firm. This is particularly interesting. I mean, the Unreal Engine comes with an installer. It's no big deal. You double click it. If you double click it, it wants there to be 65 gigabytes of available space on the machine. Now, if you're only installing the engine and you're not doing a whole bunch of like iOS and Android development, you don't need anywhere near 65 gigs. However, when you uncheck all the stuff you don't need, it still goes looking for the 65 gigs. So it's kind of crazy. All that to say, there's a lot of interesting workarounds that you can do with PX tools. Like we managed to install the Unreal Engine without ever using the Unreal Engine installer, which was kind of cool. And similarly, if you work in Rhino, you're going to have a bunch of plugins and scripts and things that you want to manage as well. So we're going to look at all that stuff. And then, of course, there is licensing all this stuff. I was one of the people like a decade ago that started complaining to Autodesk, like we should be able to install our third-party apps with Revit out of the box. And I'd like to admit I was wrong about asking for that because they gave it to us. And suddenly you could like append an installer to the end of the deployment and you got one option for how to embed arguments in that installer. And unfortunately, that meant if every single developer of apps didn't do it exactly the same way, you were screwed. So I was one of the people who like bugged Revit development, like you should make it so we can do this. And then they did. And then I realized it was worthless because what we asked for was stupid. So my bad. Now, something important that I like to tell everybody whenever someone's watching a webinar that we do on deployments in PX Tools. PX Tools is what I'll call a hyper configurator. It will help you configure things. It will maintain a set list, if you will, or a playlist of what needs to happen or what state machines need to be in. And it's an automation machine. It won't fix anything, though. So a lot of folks come up to me and they say, we know that you use PX tools for these deployments. Can you help us? And I say, sure. What's the problem that you're having? Well, our deployments all error out. Well, it's not going to fix that. If there's something stopping your deployment from succeeding, what's going to happen is PX tools will kick off that deployment, and then the deployment will still fail, and PX tools will just report that it failed. That's kind of funny. Gordon is on the other screen trying to get into the webinar, but he can't because he didn't register. That's awkward. Anyways, so I just want to throw that out there that PX tools will not actually fix a failing deployment. So there are some tips that you need to know if you're not somebody who already builds Revit deployments. And the hardest one, and this is the one that's the most frustrating for IT departments whenever I speak to them at AE firms, like they have to understand the point releases and the hot fixes and the different subcomponents and the prerequisites for software like Revit and AutoCAD. And it sucks that sometimes when Autodesk releases hot fixes and point releases, it gets very confusing, especially during those years when they did the 2018.2 and then 2018.0.2, and they were like the same thing, but one was the non-subscription version. So that all gets super confusing. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter that it's confusing. Even PX tools won't really help you understand which ones have to go in what order. You have to know that, or you have to reach out to somebody who does, because installing them in the wrong order will just totally break stuff. The second one I just added in like 15 minutes ago because of a conversation I was having on Reddit, which is, I don't know why a lot of people think uninstalling software from Autodesk just to reinstall it will sometimes fix stuff. It very, very rarely does. My Revit's acting up. I'm getting this weird error. Let's uninstall Revit and reinstall it. So sometimes, like maybe 10% of the time, that'll fix a problem. But 90% of the time people do that, the problem's going to get worse because uninstalling and reinstalling Revit gets to be a giant pain in the ass. So I always recommend folks don't do that, especially because Autodesk uninstallers won't clear out anything on the user side, registry, current user registry or app data, anything of that nature. So there's 100 things I would try before uninstalling Autodesk software just to reinstall it. Having said that, when we get into the talk about the deployments themselves, we'll talk about how to try to fix this issue of like my deployments sometimes just don't work. And there's some neat tricks that you can use there. There's what we call the ignore failure. And this is a really cool thing if your deployments have problems and it's something like you're running the deployment and you get like some C++ redistributable error and then the deployment fails. We'll talk about how you can actually kill those failures to make the deployments install, which is kind of neat. We'll also talk about how not to fix that, because I was trying to deploy to Melissa's VM and it failed like 15 times in a row and we couldn't figure it out. And then finally I had the presence of mind to go look, and half of the deployment was missing from her server. So that's another tip is, if your deployment is ruined on the server, nothing about PX Tools is going to fix it. We may, if we have time, get into some of these little things as well. I don't know if you've ever seen these acronyms before, but these are all parts of Autodesk software now. And so these two are part of Revit. PACR is called the Personal Accelerator, and RCAO is actually Revit collaboration over the internet. It's BIM 360 basically. And the reason I like to bring these up now is because they are not part of the Revit installer. They're a second installer that gets thrown in with the Revit installer. And that goes back to the whole, don't just start uninstalling and reinstalling stuff, because you're going to end up with like a newer version of PACR. And then you may have like an older version trying to get installed with your deployment, and it just gets weird. So I'll say hi to Josh because he IM'd everybody. Okay, so let's just jump back. So PX Tools is what I call a maintainer. And I like the phrase maintain because it more accurately describes what we do with PX Tools compared to with something like PDQ or with something like SCCM, which are very task-based. So like SCCM, you tell it run this task. PDQ, you tell it run this task. Now, PDQ also has a heartbeat mode where you can sort of get it to be a maintainer as well, but it's a bit more complicated. So let's just say, and then we're going to jump into the actual PX Tools in a few minutes. We're getting through all the homework first, but let's say we wanted to create what we're going to call a set. And you should think of a set as like the entire machine, right? So this is my set list for a machine, and I'm going to tell it, install Revit 2021, install AutoCAD 2021, install Enscape, and install Dynamo. Now, this is a super slimmed down example. So here's what we're going to mean by that. For Revit, that means run the deployment and then do some customizing. For AutoCAD, it's going to mean run the deployment. And just for the sake of this demo, we're going to say install the version from 10 days ago of Enscape. And then Dynamo, we're going to say you need to sync these packages every single day. So when we run PX Tools, it will then say, okay, everything in green is now done. So I ran it. Now I'm going to leave Dynamo blue because we have told it to do that every day. So this is what I mean by the maintainer. So PX Tools is kind of interesting because it runs every single day when you log into the computer, but that runs as a user. So we'll get into this in a little bit. Now let's say as the BIM manager or as the IT person, I go back and I edit this set list. It's just it's a text file, basically an XML file on the server. Let's say I go edit it and I say, now I want to have 2021.1 installed in the middle here, right? So this is your point release that came out in the middle of the year. I want 2021.1 installed. And oh, look, Enscape released a version that doesn't break BIM 360 anymore. So now I want to take this version off and I want to put this version on. That's cool. What happens at this point when you tell PX Tools to conform the machine is it's going to say, okay, this is the full list I need to look at right here. But first I need to look at my computer, which is this current list here. And I need to figure out, how do I maintain that? And it says, in order to maintain this new set, or this updated set, I should say, I need to run this task, run an uninstall of this task because it's told to go away, then run the new one, and then, oh, this is a daily task, I need to do it again anyway. So PX tools will literally automatically investigate what the machine is supposed to have and do the difference, which is really cool. Now, there is some technicalities there. And so, because a lot of people hear that and they're like, that's awesome, it just runs every single day. Well, it can't run in the admin context every day, right? So there's a couple of different times PX tools is running. It has what's called the administrative context. And that is, at the beginning of the webinar, if you were here, I double clicked a shortcut on this machine. And so by the way, this machine is still running. It's doing a whole bunch of stuff here that I'll tell you about later. So it's still running. When you actually tell it to run, you can tell it to run with admin credentials or in the admin context. And that means, that's where you're actually doing your stuff like that requires admin rights. You're running your deployments, you're doing your installers for your add-ins and whatever else. That happens anytime the command to set up a machine or conform a machine is run. So the trick is that those are the commands that you have your IT groups run if you're in a firm where there aren't admin rights everywhere. And by the way, there should not be admin rights everywhere. I'm just going to throw that out there. Now, there's also what we call the user context. And this is what I mean by that everyday thing, right? So when you have PX tools, and you've used it to set up a machine, every single time any user logs into the machine, PX tools runs again, but it runs in what's called the user context. And that means it does any list of tasks that have been told to run in user context. Now, the trick here is user context, of course, is going to run using the rights of that user. So if your users are not an admin, you can't try to tell user context to install something that requires administrative privileges. They can only run things that can go basically in their user profile, unless your firm has no security, at which point kudos to still being alive in 2020 as a firm. So I'm just going to stop really quick because we have a question from Heinrich, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. But he says, in the past, I got the recommendation from Autodesk that users should have admin rights on their devices. Is that right? It is absolutely incorrect, and it is a horribly bad idea. Now, let me preface this by saying I absolutely believe that you heard that from Autodesk. I absolutely do. It wouldn't surprise me if you heard that from any software manufacturer, because if everybody has admin rights, it makes software manufacturers' lives way easier. Here's the technicality there. It did used to be true that Revit specifically ran better if you were an admin. And the reason why is pre-2010, Revit was not Microsoft profile compliant. And what I mean by that is, like, I know there's some Autodesk Revit old timers on the webinar with me. And I'm one of them, by the way. But what I mean by that is, if you remember, prior to Revit 2010, the INI file was in program files. So if it's in program files, nobody can edit it unless they're an admin. So like, you couldn't edit your own INI settings if you weren't an administrator. They got Revit profile compliant in either 2009 or 2010. Since then, there's been absolutely no reason for people to have admin rights to run it every day. Autodesk may still say that. And the unfortunate thing, and I don't want this to sound arrogant, but the unfortunate thing is the people giving out that advice from Autodesk, they're not experts at either their own software or IT stuff. But it is super dangerous in 2020 for everybody to have admin rights. We're a very small company, and myself, John, and Melissa, we all have admin rights over our machines, and we're even working on changing that, where we're all still going to have administrative accounts, but they're going to be different accounts that we don't log in with every day, because it's just super dangerous. You click one email, you click one accidental link from the wrong email, and it's over. The whole company's infrastructure is gone. And that's not a scare tactic, by the way. We have had 3 clients in the last 2 years get massively malwared and lose the majority of their servers. So anyways, we'll get back on topic. Great question. I'm glad you brought it up. So the user context, of course, again, only runs with the user's rights. There's also what we call the removal context. And that's one of the neat things about PX tools, is that it will also uninstall stuff for you. So we'll talk about that when we get into the actual definitions files. And there's also a really neat feature that we used to use at Parallax, and we still use it a little bit when we're able to travel. But PX Tools has what's called locations. And locations are kind of this wild concept where You can insert your own wildcards into things like deployments and things like customizations, and you can change those wildcards on the fly. Here's a brief example of that. Our entire Revit library of content lives on our server. So if I am in, I guess I closed it already. If I'm in Revit and I'm looking at our content browser, it is running off of the server that's in the closet over there. If I have to go to a conference or if I have to go to a meeting, I double click a shortcut called relocate, and it takes about 30 seconds to run. At the end of the 30 seconds, I go to the client's office and I open Revit. My same content browser is there. It looks identical, and all the content at that time is on my C drive. And everything has been relocated, which is repathed completely to my C drive, and I didn't have to do anything. When I get back to the office, I hit relocate back to the office again, and it's good to go. Relocating does more than content browsers, though. It's super useful for deployment stuff because some of you may have experienced this already. Deployments and point releases now, unfortunately, go looking for their original deployment. So if your company has 3 offices, if you're in New York, Dallas, and California, and you started out in the New York office when you deployed 2021, but then you flew to Dallas or you moved to California. You wouldn't move to California right now, I hope, because it's on fire. But anyways, if you're in California and you go to run a point release and your original deployment was run from the New York server, it will try to pull from the New York server. And it just makes the point releases take like hours to run. So there's a lot of firms out there that have reached out and they said, my gosh, I'm just trying to run 2021.1 and it's taking hours. Why is that? Well, what's happening is they're all doing it at home and they're on VPN. And their VPN says, okay, the deployment is available, but it's in the office. So their 1.5 meg home internet is trying to download a 3 gigabyte deployment off their office server. So relocate is kind of handy. We'll show you some fun stuff with that if we get to it. Okay, so here is where PX Tools really starts to make its mark. Is we talked about the tasks and they can run in an admin context or they can run every day in the user context. But what we have to also now talk about is what counts as a task, like what things can we do? So obviously you can run installers, EXEs, MSIs, MSPs, anything you want to run, including any arguments that you want to run, you can do that. And we're going to open the definitions file and I'll show you some in a few minutes. You can, of course, uninstall as well. Where things start to get really neat in terms of customizing your software, you can run copy tasks. You can tell it to copy individual files. You can tell it to copy entire folders. You can also tell it copy files and rename them when they get where you want them to go. Now, where it gets really fun for me is in addition to running a brute force copy, you can also instantiate robocopy mirror. If you're not familiar with the mirror task for robocopy, if there's a folder with 10 files on the server and a folder with 10 files on the computer, when you tell it to mirror to the computer, it's way faster than telling it to copy, because when you tell it to copy, it always recopies it, even if it's already on the computer. When you tell it to mirror, on the fly, it compares the folder on the computer to the folder on the server. And if their files are already there, it just skips it and doesn't copy it again. So mirror is incredibly fast. It's great. You can delete things, which is very handy with Autodesk deployments. You can also do what's called breadcrumbing. And this is super kind of interesting, but if you want to replace a file on a machine, but you want to keep the original one, you can tell it to breadcrumb it, where it will basically name the file like, file.old or file.date. You can basically rename the old file so it's still there in case you want it for later, which is kind of cool. Now, on the IT side, PX Tools can also do some pretty heavy lifting just in terms of you can customize tasks to set environment variables. You can edit registry keys, create registry keys, merge registry keys, edit registry keys. It's fantastic about that. You can modify permissions on a file. And this is the kind of thing that I generally like to show to the BIM folks. But when IT folks see this, they get really freaked out. Again, keep in mind, you would have to do it in the admin context. But in the admin context, if you tell PX Tools, select a file in the C drive and edit its file permissions for security, PX Tools can do it because it's just running through PowerShell. That was handy because Autodesk had a glitch one year where the PIT file for the licensing. I forget the name of the PIT file now. Holy cow. Let's go see what it was called. See program data. Oh gosh, I'm gonna forget where it is too. It's definitely Friday. ADLM, right down here. This product information.pit. Thank you. So product information.pit, I want to say it was Revit 2015. There was a glitch where the deployment would run and it wouldn't ruin the pit file, but it would modify the permissions so nobody had read or write access to it. So whenever anybody tried to launch software, it just errored out. So as dumb as this is, now we just have a standard line in our PX tools that says always check the permissions and make sure authenticated users can read and write to that file. It's kind of silly. We want to kill the Autodesk App Manager. Sounds snotty, but up until 6 months ago, we could just choose not to install it. We can't choose that anymore, so we want to kill it. And of course, if you work in IT, or if you're like me and you don't work in IT, I would like an inventory of what got done on the machine. That's important because I want to keep track of who has what. And of course, relocate, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So again, you get to pick when the tasks run too. We said that on rollout was anytime I clicked or instantiated the command for a conform or a setup. It does not have to be a click, but so if I tell it to roll something out, I can tell it to just do a task once, or I can tell it to do a task every single time I do a conform or a rollout. And the just once versus the every time, you get to pick if tasks happen once or every time. So here's a great example. Those custom icons that I like to set up. So this is not the machine that was running, by the way. This is a different VM, but like these custom icons that I like to put on, that happens on the admin side during the deployments, but I tell it to do these icons every single time we conform. Why? Because 2021.2 will jack up my custom icon again. So since I just tell the task, keep running every time, it will always put my icons back, which makes it something I don't ever have to touch. It just happens automatically. You can also tell a task on the user side, do I run once or do I run every single time the user logs in? So here's a great example. A just once user task is load their custom keyboard shortcuts, load their Revit INI file, and load the material UI config.xml. Only do that once, the first time they log in after we deploy Revit. Why do we not do it every time? Can you imagine if like the user had added their own keyboard shortcut and then tomorrow we replaced their keyboard shortcuts with our own? They'd get super pissed. But what do we do every single time the user logs in? We sync their Dynamo packages. So at Parallax, John handles the Dynamo packages because, he's way smarter about them than I am. And so he updates a Dynamo package folder on the server. And when I log in tomorrow, I just automatically have it, which means when I finally restart my machine, like in 5 days, I get the new packages because I'm a bad person and I leave my machine on for a week. Uninstall stuff's a little bit different. It's basically only going to run once, but that's a good thing because you don't really want uninstalls to just keep trying to happen. That would be, well, let me rephrase. It'll run, and then if it's successful, it won't try to run again. That would be weird. Okay, so all of these things live in what's called a definitions file, and that's what we're going to open now so that we can actually take a look at it. This is where when I talk to IT folks or when I talk to other BIM managers, this is where they say, oh, this is why we like PDQ. PDQ has a UI. And I'm like, okay, I get that. Like PDQ has a user interface. It's got a great experience. And XML can be super intimidating, especially if you just open it on the fly and have no idea what you're looking at. Like this is where you live when you're deploying with PX tools. This looks super scary. And here's what you should take away from this. I cannot write a single line of code at all. I don't do Python. I don't do I can barely do a code block in Dynamo, but once you understand the structure of what you're looking at here in PX Tools definitions, it's nothing but the name of some properties followed by some addresses on the server. So we're going to dive into this, but I like to point that out because the first time I saw the XML, I freaked out. I was like, this is a non-starter. I'm never going to be able to do this. And then I'm like, okay, so it's an address for a deployment. I can kind of handle that. So we'll get into that in a little bit. Here's what makes this so awesome though, okay? It's very extensible because it is such basic XML. So with SCCM or with PDQ, They're all functional, don't get me wrong. But like if you want to take your 2020 setup and you want to migrate it to 2021, there's a lot of legwork and a lot of kind of task recreation. So if I go to the directory where our PX tools live, everything is basically what's called, that's stupid, you can't zoom in like that. Everything is what's called a definitions file, right? And so you'll see that there's definitions for 2020, definitions for 2021, definitions for 19, and these are all my Autodesk definitions. Then I have definitions for all of the other software that we use. So, you know, Parallax apps, Inkscape, Enscape, Dynamo. We have a package called Buy Cortana to shut up Cortana in Microsoft Windows. We've got Syncro, we've got Rhino, and all of our Revit add-ins are under this one here. So you can have as many definitions files as you want, but here is what's so fantastic about it. If I open my single user definition file right here, actually, let's make a copy of it. Let's not be that person. Let's not ruin our live definitions files today. How's that sound? I'm going to copy and paste this file here, and I'm going to change this to 2022 on the loudest keyboard in the planet, which I love. Then I'm going to open it. Now, if we start talking about what these definitions are doing, as an example, it's running the deployments. So as we said, there were packages. And if we were to collapse the packages, you would see that it's all the pieces of software that we have from Autodesk for 2021. So this is Revit 2021, AutoCAD 2021, AutoCAD Mechanical 2021, Electrical, Civil 3D, FabCAD, InfraWorks, and so on. Now, when you expand a package, it's broken up just like we had it broken up in the PowerPoint. So when we expand it, there is what stuff happens during a rollout, what stuff happens during an uninstall, and what stuff happens when the machine needs to get relocated. So every piece of software is broken up into that exact same 3 groups. And then inside each of these 3 groups, so if we say what happens during a rollout, which means what happens during an install of Revit 2021, if we expand it, you'll then see there's what tasks happen on the admin side and what tasks happen on the user side. So let's step through this because, I mean, when you read it in plain English, it makes a ton of sense. So if we expand the machine side, when an administrator tells a machine to conform and it knows it needs to do Revit 2021, the first thing that happens is what's called installing the program Revit 2021. Now, if you skip the rules part, which I'll show you in a minute, you'll see that what it's doing is simply launching a Revit deployment. This is the name of the deployment, the location where we have it on the server. If you've ever had to SCCM or command line an Autodesk deployment before, you'll recognize these 3 lines because this is literally the text file that Autodesk gives you that they say, if you want to launch a deployment from the command line, go type this. And that's exactly what it does. Now, this portion above it, which is a little scary, is something new that Gordon introduced a couple of years ago when everybody started experiencing these issues of like, hey, if you run the point releases out of order, it completely frags your Revit. So this rule is really neat. Before it starts this task, PX Tools, which is running in PowerShell, will go check the machine and look for what's called version number of the software Revit 2021. If it finds a value greater than this, it will not run this task, but it will mark it as successful. Because essentially what that means is there's already software newer than Revit 2021 on here. And that's actually interesting because that's the wrong number right there. Interestingly enough, it's running anyway though, because there's no version of 2021 on the machine, but that should be 21. I need to go check that number. It's not going to matter because I did a save as. So anyways, run the deployment for 2021 is the first task here. And you'll see that it's bracketed by this thing called install program. So that rolls itself up into a little task. What's the next thing it runs? The 2021.1 point release. And again, here it checks the version number for 2021. Now, how do we get these version numbers? There's no magic to it, unfortunately. We actually go into Revit on a test machine before we do our rollout every year. And we go into here and say, this is supposed to be, this is a bad example because this is not a current machine. This is an old machine. So 21.0.0.383 should be what's up here, actually. 383. So mine is wrong at the moment. Now, if you were to install 2021.1, which is actually happening on the other machine that we looked at, and it's still it's on 0.1.1, by the way. So just to show you that what's happened while we've been talking is 2021 successfully installed, 2021.1 finished, and now it's on 2021.1.1. And then it's going to do all the fun stuff after that, and we'll come back and look at it. So again, it's going to say, look at this number. If we're less than that number, deploy 2021.1, then go on to 0.1.1. And if we're less than this number, and so on and so forth. Now, this is all, again, happening on the machine side. So then here is where it starts doing a bunch of icky, funny stuff that is custom. You don't have to do this. This is stuff that I choose to do at Parallax. But essentially, if you go into your registry and you go down to this super creepy location right here, you'll find out that Autodesk is storing the location of the original deployment used. And that's where we think it will go looking for the original deployment when it goes to do a point release. Now, what's super cool about the PX tools is you'll notice that I don't actually have my server name in here. Like location root is not the name of our server. But what's happening there is myself, John, and Melissa all have different server names because we're in 3 different locations. So this is where that relocate thing comes in. This is a wildcard that we're able to put in that automatically replaces this value with the location any of us are in. That means you don't need 3 different setups for 3 different offices. Now, since we started Parallax, we've now implemented DFS namespace. So we don't use the location root wildcard for us anymore, but for our clients, absolutely. We have a client that has 8 locations. So they have 8 series of deployments, and they get mirrored around all of their servers, and their paths are all different. And that's how they manage it with only one setup of PX tools, is they have a location wildcard. And I know what you're thinking, like, why would they do that? They could use namespace, they could use drive letters, and it's worth mentioning now, drive letters just suck on the Autodesk side for a whole bunch of reasons, but we can get into that a little later. And I will get into that later if anybody wants to talk about it. But so anyways, we're going to change this registry key on the fly to make sure that our registry key is always matching the location we're currently in. Now, what's also neat is if it's a named task, if it's got a green name, that means it runs once until it's successful. So from the moment you tell a machine to conform, it will try to install Revit 2021. If it succeeds, it will write this name in the registry and not try to do it again. Similar with the point release and the point release. The registry, it's not named. It will always do this because we want to always make sure it's up to date. So then similarly, update my fancy icon because I like my fancy icons. Update my fancy Revit viewer icon. If you're still using Revit server, God bless your soul, but let's go fill out our RSN file just in case you need it. And let's go fill in your RS accelerator environment variable. And then we even repetitively, we redundantly tell PX tools to do the same stuff that Autodesk is supposed to do automatically. Copy the user data cache contents to the machine, copy our current Revit INI file to the machine. And then again, I'm going to shred the Autodesk materials because we don't want them. And then we start doing just some kind of funny stuff. I delete all of the shortcuts that Autodesk puts on the public desktop. Because again, if you're in an architecture firm where the users don't have admin rights, they can't delete stuff off the public desktop and they can't put stuff there. So we'll actually delete it off the public desktop and then put it on their desktops because the users won't know the difference, but it makes them happier because then they can move their shortcuts and not get like denied all the time. So it's just something a little different that we'll do. Okay, now you'll notice that we got to the end of the machine context. So that's all stuff that this machine is doing right now. And these freaking hot fixes take forever. So we'll just let it keep going. It should, I've timed it before, it should get done at about 3:05, I think. Now, if we collapse the machine side, there's then a whole bunch of tasks that run on the user side when we're deploying Revit 2021. Let's try that again. So you'll see here that now we're copying that app data stuff into the user's app data roaming. And again, people ask me like, Revit does that when the user first launches automatically. Why would you have PX tools do it redundantly? And here's why. Rhetorical question for those of you on the call, but how many of you have like deployed Revit, then realized after the fact there was a mistake in your INI file and you needed to like send an INI file update to everybody? There's officially a way to do it by going into the INI file and like adding in a GUID for the INI file, but it's super kludgy and it's complicated and it doesn't always work. Here's what's great about user side context of PX tools. A named task will only run once. So if it's 3 weeks after Revit deployment and I suddenly realize, oh my gosh, I need to push a new INI file to everybody, I'll come down here in this definitions file and I'll add in the exact same thing with a date. It's now a brand new task and we don't have to run a conform. This is going to run the next time the user logs in. It's going to say, I've already done that. Hold on, I haven't done this one yet. And in this case, if we wanted to do it in an emergency, we would actually just list a server address here. So we would say like, go to the server and get, new Revit INI file, whatever. And then it's going to now, the next time the user logs in, copy this new Revit INI file into the user's directory. And that is going to brute force override their INI file. But sometimes in an emergency, you need to do that. So totally true story. Client had a server get fragged one night and they were down for a few days. And when they rebuilt the server, it had a different address than the old one. And there's not really a reason for that to happen. So let's not go there. But if it does happen and they suddenly need to shove a new INI file into everybody's app data to repath everything for Revit, yeah, it's totally true that they can do it through group policy. And here's the thing, this is band-aiding a stupid problem because a good IT group could handle that. Then again, a good IT group would not have renamed the server. So in that case, we jumped in here and literally just said, new INI file with stupid new pathing. And we shoved it into everybody's computer. Didn't have to go touch any machines. It was a huge win. Anyways, keyboard shortcuts. And then there's doing our custom places dialog. And so this is what I was telling you about, where we can do the places through the registry instead of doing them in the Revit INI file, because it just ends up being cleaner. The registry method allows you to remove a lot of the garbage that Autodesk has put in there, which is kind of interesting. Now, the last couple of tasks here are a bit misleading. It used to be the case that you could actually auto pin all of these cool icons to the taskbar. And if you're not an IT nerd, you probably don't know about this, but this is apparently a war going on between Microsoft and everybody else, because folks like us want to be able to pin 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21 to the taskbar. And Microsoft is like, no. So every different release of Windows 10 for the last couple of years, they kill how we do pin to taskbar, and then somebody finds a new way to do it, and then they kill that one in the next release. So right now, pin to taskbar doesn't work, which stinks because I liked it. But then we'll copy a custom user shortcut as well. So that's basically installing Revit 2021. Is we're just typing out a list of all the different tasks. Now, right below rollout is what happens when we uninstall, what happens when we remove, Revit 2021. And sorry, I'm just looking at something because that looked weird. Okay, so on a removal, it's the same thing. What happens on the machine side? We run the Revit uninstaller. We uninstall C4R 2021. We uninstall the 2021 content libraries. By the way, none of this stuff, you don't have to know any of these wacky numbers. There's a really cool tool that comes with your PX tools, and it's called uninstallers. And so if I run this, it will literally give you everything that's on your machine. So what's really neat about this, by the way, is if you were to run this uninstall task lister on every computer in your company, it will tell you everything that's on those computers, even the stuff that PX tools didn't put there, because this is a list of everything it's going to find. And then the really neat thing is if you were to actually just take these 3 lines and copy and paste them into PX tools, you could just vaporize everybody's software. So if people are installing stuff they're not supposed to on your machine, it's really easy to take it out, which is kind of cool. But anyways, here's what I like about it. This is all stuff Autodesk doesn't necessarily do for you. Go into program data and delete the folders that Revit 21 created. Go into the roaming app data on the user side and get rid of those files. So you can clean up after yourself, which is really nice about PX tools. Okay, now that is one package called Revit 2021. And that is the rollout side, the removal side, and then relocate is a bit more complicated to understand. And just to kind of peek at what that does, essentially, you'll notice that on the user side for relocate, there is what's called relocate a file. And that file is the Revit INI. Okay. And it has a wildcard here called root content. Root content is just a bizarre name of a variable that I gave something. But essentially what root content is it's the entire server address where our content lives. And I'll show you this because this is pretty fun to look at. If on our server, you were to go Parallax, Files, Revit, 2021, Families, you would find our content library. I'm not on a laptop, so it's probably not there, actually. See. Okay. If I were on a laptop right now, I could go to see Parallax Revit 2021 Families, and you would find this exact same list. So what happens is our laptops have an extra PX Tools package called local libraries, and they copy all the content libraries, they mirror them locally so that they have an up-to-date copy from when they last touched the server. So what this task called relocate does is it says, look for the root content path, which is that right there. And it replaces that with C:parallax \Revit. And it literally goes in the INI file and does it so that the user does not perceive any difference when they're outside of the office or when they're in. So the relocate tasks are kind of neat because all of these tasks are buried inside their piece of software. So you don't ever have to say, oh, geez, I need to write a task to change the Revit 2021 INI. You just say, relocate the machine, go somewhere else, and it's just done. Now, expanding on this a little bit, if we come back to here, so we talked about a little of the wildcard stuff, but okay, what I was looking for was, geez, really? Where did I go? There we go. So what we said is we just looked at a package, and that package was basically Revit 2021. So where this gets to be really cool is you can now imagine that like Enscape's got a package as well, Dynamo's got a package, but going back to what we said about our original Revit 2021 deployment or requirements was we had all these other add-ins that we need to do. So the way this works in PX tools is Dynamo is going to be a package and Kiwi Codes is going to be a package and CTC will be a package, but then you get to decide how the packages all get stitched together. So what I mean is this is a definitions file that is for the particular pieces of software. This is the definitions for Autodesk 2021. If instead we go to the definitions files for the sets, this is literally what runs all of our machines here. So we have a machine called BIM Desktop, or that's a machine type. So what does BIM Desktop do if you tell it to conform this set? It installs Classic Shell, gets rid of Cortana, does our Office templates, does some housekeeping, and then it installs Revit 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. Don't worry about the format changing here. That's a license thing. We switched licenses this year, so we had to rename everything. And then basically it goes through and it does Revit add-ins. So Revit add-ins is a really fun package to look at because packages can daisy chain other packages. So the single package called Revit add-ins version agnostic installs the Palladio Windows tiler up through Revit 2018. We don't use it in 19 plus because of tabbed views. So install the BIM 42 aligner, install PyRevit, install all of the CTC suites, install preview image generator, install BIM interoperability, Navisworks, and our family browser. So it's a single package inside a single set. So we don't ever do anything else. And if you were to look through these, you would see probably exactly what you were expecting. Which one of these doesn't have? Okay, we'll go look at this one. That's fine. So if you go look at KiwiCode's browser, it's pretty straightforward. It's basically running the installers, and then it's got an argument for the serial number. And I'll just keep an eye on our serial numbers now because I just broadcast them, which is stupid, but couldn't think of another way to do that. So PyRevit as an example, we're doing a bunch of highly custom stuff for the install just because of how PyRevit likes to install. But this is where things get really cool is you can literally custom tailor your definitions for however that software wants to install. So if we go look at preview image generator, it's just super basic. That is the entire definition for preview image generator right there. It's all blank. There's nothing on the user side. There's no mirroring. There's no copying. There's no anything. It's just run that installer and then run that uninstaller if you want to take it out. That's the whole thing. And this is the beautiful thing about PX tools, by the way. Actually, these shouldn't even be here. They're just junk. What's really neat about this is it's basically you just copy and paste your butt off. So if I get another add-in tomorrow that uses an MSI, I take this entire package and I just copy and paste it down here, change the name to new add-in, and then I change the install name to new add-in whatever. And then I'll go change the address. And you do want to make sure that you change the uninstall GUID, because if you were to do this, you would install the new add-in, and then when you went to uninstall it, you would uninstall preview image generator. So you have to be careful with your copying and pasting, and I'm pretty bad about that, honestly. But all that to say, your simpler tools are very quick to write definitions for, and this is where the users get all the value. And this is specifically the stuff that IT doesn't want to handle, because there's like 15 extra installers that have to be run over the top of Revit. So how you manage all these is different at every firm. I always run what we call a Revit add-ins VX package, and I list all the add-ins that we want in there. And you'll notice some of them are commented out because, like, for instance, we're not using that add-in anymore. That one, we're still using that one. I don't know why it's commented out. But then also, we even have a separate one for like our apps, our internal Parallax apps. And so if I were to go in that one, you would find all of the different installers that John has built for all of our Parallax apps. And by the way, this gets to be really cool because we'll have versions of apps change, right? So just this week, that's the wrong one. Just this week, John made some updates to some of our Parallax apps. And so when that happened, we literally came in. And so here's what's great about it, right? So, and now this is an old version. This is like a 2018 app. But so you'll see here that I've got the app called Arrowhead Assigner. And I'm saying it's just running an exe installer, but we've named the installer with the version number. So this is 1.0.0, and the green name is the one that we store in PX tools. So it doesn't matter that it's slightly different. But here's what's so great about this. As we said, PX tools is keeping track of what it's done on every machine. So if we go under local machine, pragmatic praxis, you'll see a list of everything successfully done on the machine. And so if I go under Parallax apps, you'll see each of them. So in this case, Arrowhead Assigner has run the version 2020 3.16.01. I'll give you a hint. It's not up to date because this is off my actual machine and I haven't updated my machine yet. But here's what's so great about PX tools. When John releases an update to this app and changes this from 100 to 110 or 101, I'm just going to come in the definition file and do that. Because now when PX tools goes to run the next conform, it's going to go looking for that name and say, I don't see that name anywhere. I need to run that name, and it's going to rerun this tool, the installer. Now, if you need to uninstall the old one, that's okay, because if you had the removal information down here for the old version, then in that case, what you would have done is you actually would have just copied this whole thing and then changed the name. But in that case, it would uninstall the old version and then reinstall the new one after the fact. So it's really great at updating things. And that's why it's so fantastic for like the point releases for Revit and things of that nature. So let's see, it's 3:06. This thing should be getting close. Geez, it's still going. Okay, it's doing AutoCAD now. The AutoCAD task is the last big thing, and then it finishes. But so while we're waiting for this, we'll just actually review. And so here's the other cool thing is we're getting a log of everything that's happening on every machine. one of our clients actually went crazy and made their own log parsing database where they ripped all these logs into like a database on their server. So the IT guy could just sit at home and ping the database and see what the machines were doing. But while I've been droning on, this is all a list of what's happened. So let's see, we did Classic Shell, got rid of Cortana, did our Parallax Office templates, set up our icons and our desktop info, which is this thing on the top of my desktop up here. That'll show up when the machine restarts just because I like it. So we installed Revit 21.1.1.1, did all of our customizations, deleted the shortcuts, did all of our Revit add-ins, did PyRevit, BIM Align, CTC suites, preview image generator, the BIM interop stuff, the Kiwi Codes family browser. We installed Clippy in Revit 2019. And again, so these are all the Parallax apps that John's built. So they've all been installed, and it mirrored all of our Dynamo definitions. So we won't see the Dynamo definitions if I go look for them right now, because when this rollout is done, it's going to log me off the machine. And then when I log back in, the Dynamo graphs will all sync. By the way, this is super handy because of what they're doing now with the Revit versions and the Dynamo versions. So if we were to actually go open this up, this is a little cringy. So if you guys are Dynamo experts, this may be a little cringy for you, but not Dynamo 1.1 or 1.2. These are super old definitions. So I think 2.x is the new one. Yeah. Okay. So I stopped counting the versions because it doesn't matter now, since now they are installing the new Dynamo versions, right? But if we were to go look on my machine, just as an example, if we go to app data and we go to Dynamo, Revit, you'll see that we have this happening, right? So as I'm sure you all know now, Dynamo is installed as part of Revit. Like, so when there's a point release, it installs a new version of Dynamo. So I'm not on 2.6 yet because, again, my physical machine, I haven't updated yet. That's why I'm doing our definitions updates right now. Once I have new machines to deploy and I need to roll out or update our machines. But for instance, there's 2.5 packages. And there's also 2.4 packages. Now, it's totally true that I don't think I'm not using all of these anymore, but it gets tricky if you also have older versions of Revit. So, I mean, we have 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. Obviously, we're not using 16 and 17 anymore, but I still do a bunch of stuff in 18 because it's where we develop our template. It's where we develop our libraries. So I still need my packages to still sync to the older versions of Dynamo as well. So here's why I bring this up. I think Autodesk, and I think I heard this from John, I think Autodesk has done kind of a cool thing where the first time I launched 2021.1, which has Dynamo 2.6, I believe it will copy the packages out of 2.5 so that they're current in 2.6. The problem is, I believe, I'm not 100%, but I believe it's a one-time copy. Now that scares me because if it's a one-time copy, yep, John says, yes, it copies on first run. So that's awesome for the move from 0.5 to 0.6. But what concerns me is, what about like my 2.1 or whatever? I forget which one runs in 2018, but that one still needs to update. So if you go to my Dynamo definitions, we're doing a super cringy thing, but it works like a champ. So the installation is grayed out. That's because it's turned off, and it's turned off because we used to have to install it manually, but now we don't have to. So we're letting Autodesk just handle the installs how they want. Now, this part is kind of fun. On the machine context side, which means whenever an administrator runs a conform or whatever, we're copying the packages off the server into a folder on the C drive. And we're only doing that in case of emergencies. Like, let's say the first time I log on the machine, I'm not connected to the server. That's like an edge case, but I want to cover the edge case as best I can. So what it's going to do then is kind of funny. On the user side, whenever they log in, it's going to go to the server, location root, and it's going to say, copy the packages from 2.x into 2.0. and into 2.1 and 2.2 and 2.3 and 2.4 and 2.5. And now that 2021 has a 0.6, I'm going to plop one of these right here and do that. And so now all of my packages are going to be up to date. Then it does something funny where, and again, this is super redundant, but you'll notice that then it does it again from the C drive, from the same folder that we copied to originally. So this is, again, this is what I call like an edge case convenient thing. I don't want anybody to know that there's a problem if they're not connected to the server. I still want Dynamo to work. So whenever it gets a chance, it goes from the server to the C drive. When the user logs in, it tries to go from the server to their app data. In the event that it can't, it goes from the C drive folder to their app data anyway. So they've always got a really good shot of having their packages. And so again, because of 2021.1, we'll add in a copy to 0.6. It's worth noting you can clean some of these up. Like if I do 10 minutes of research and realize nobody's using 2.0 anymore, I can just take this out. And if I take it out, I can add in a one-time delete task that will then vaporize that folder and clean up everything. So that's kind of handy. But if we go back up here, this is the premise. So we've got our machine types. And again, so, Revit 2021 has all the point releases in it. Add-ins has like 30 installers. Apps has like 15. Dynamo is doing like 50 things. And then if you get into like the AutoCAD ones, that's where it does all of the crazy custom stuff for AutoCAD. And I'll show you that for a second. So this machine finished, by the way, while I was droning on. So let me log in. While that's logging in, Josh asks, is there a way to delay the copy down from the server? Yeah, that's a good question. So for folks who are 100% work from home and may connect to the VPN a few minutes after login. So there are some neat things you can do. You can put waits and sleeps basically in your PX tool definitions. And I only bring that up because there are some, how do I say this? Well, that's not cool. Speaking of failures, it didn't fail when I did this right before. Oh, geez, I bet you. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this was really stupid on my part. Hold on one second. I should have thought about that. That wasn't very bright. So I said I was going to do a save as to that file because I didn't want to be goofing around with it on the demo, and making that file. I didn't finish what I was going to show you guys in that file. So what I was going to show you is, every year, what you can then do is basically a find and replace that goes 2021 to 2022. And the entire file is basically done now, with the exception of you've got to go check like these things, and you've got to go check like this registry number is off by 1. So find and replace, what I meant to say a lot earlier is find and replace happens in PX tools because it's all basic XML. Whereas if you're in a big complex UI like PDQ, you can't, I think PDQ has some functionality like that, but it's hard to take massive amounts of data and just do find and replace. Now, one thing is that's a technicality that you don't normally see because I was screwing around. So what it didn't do yet is normally it runs the behind the scenes user login thing. Actually, we'll just log out and let it log back in. That'll be fine. Yeah, we know. Just log out. Oh, I don't know how to log out with this. There we go. So yeah, the user context didn't run because I had broken it. So if we log in this time, that's embarrassing. So we'll let this run for a minute. So just while we're waiting for this to log in, so Josh, like to answer your question, there are ways that you can. I don't know how you would. I don't know that you could reliably tell it to automatically wait for a VPN to be present. So that would be an issue, unless it's like an always on VPN, like a full tunnel always on, where it launches by itself. I know Stantec has one of those because my wife works there. But I don't know that that's what you're talking about. Like if they knew to log into VPN, you could do it. The cool thing is though, the copy and the mirror tasks are also error trapped, where they don't throw up giant errors anywhere if they don't work. So if the path isn't available, it just silently doesn't work. So a couple quick things. The user login successfully ran that time. Our resolution is ridiculously small. It's not going to fly for me. There we go. Okay, so you'll notice our custom shortcuts showed up. And if we were to go launch one of these, you would see you would see Revit in all of its customized glory. A couple of other interesting things there. Again, I don't know that anybody here has to support AutoCAD. Yeah, I guess I have to do that because of the license I installed it with, right? Try to take a guess at this. Okay, so is anybody here, like a rhetorical question, but is anybody here like super old school AutoCAD like I am? Nice. We got at least one. So I used to use AutoCAD like back when there was no ribbon. And when I was first a BIM manager in 2008 and 2009, the company I supported was 50% Revit and 50% AutoCAD architecture. They were doing a lot of VA work up in New York State, all AutoCAD architecture, strict national CAD standard compliance, all that fun, good stuff, right? So even amongst the AutoCADers in that office, it was like a mad thing about like, well, I want the ribbon and I want the toolbars and all this kind of fun stuff. So you'll notice that on these machines, we're able to use the PX tools to basically push, like these are both the same program. That's just AutoCAD Architecture Modern and AutoCAD Architecture Classic. And all that is we got to wait for all the demo stuff because it's a brand new machine at this point. So I'm not doing a license. I'm just kind of cheating. So my Keynote manager's angry. Don't show me this garbage again. So let's just get this thing open real quick. We'll do quick file, it'll be faster. Again, you'll notice we're in 2021.1.1. All of our add-ins are here. PyRevit's here. Our content browser will be there. But then also, if we go look at the desktop, this is a lot of fun. So we have our modern AutoCAD, which is AutoCAD with its normal ribbon. And again, this is really, it's PX tools helping you only because if you go back to those Bob Bell handouts I was telling you about, he teaches you how to make the CUIXs and the profiles for the two different versions of AutoCAD. But then it gets into the bootstrapping handout. And back then you had people like leveraging Lisp routines that were embedded into AutoCAD so that the Lisp routine would do the file copy. But that's literally all, we have PX tools doing that for us. So when we install AutoCAD, copy the CUIX files into the user's profile. So here is our AutoCAD setup with the ribbon and the palettes exactly how I like them because I'm a little twitchy about that. We've got our Revit title block in here in AutoCAD just in an emergency in case we need to draw something. But again, the important thing is it's all ribbon. Now, if I close it, and I go to this other one, and there is going to be one error when you launch it because when I built these deployments 5 months ago, I forgot to save a file, but it still works. So you'll see now we're in old schoolville where we've got our, okay, I jacked it up because of that file that's missing. But this is our old school toolbar version and the ribbons are normally turned off. So it's just kind of a funny thing you can do. But again, here's our Revit. And so this is what we get from a hands-off deployment where we just let it run on its own. We've got our content browser, everything's pathed. We've got our nice places dialog over here. We've got all of our add-ins, all that kind of good stuff. Here's the John ribbon with our awesome colored tabs that you want. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, so basically that's PX tools in a nutshell. So just to show you, the other interesting thing is what we ran that time. This is another thing, by the way, we had PX tools set all these up. So I was telling you earlier, drive letters are horrifying. And if you don't know why drive letters are bad, it gets into a whole discussion about the fact that drive letters are basically set up at the user level. So all of our clients use them, right? So like one of our clients has an R drive for Revit, one has a P drive for projects, one has an I drive for information. Those letters don't really exist. They're set up at the user level. And the dangerous thing about that is if somebody sets the letters up differently, that's where you start to break your central files, right? So a network location is different because when we double click on one of these and it does this, it's still typing the full address. So it's not showing it right now, but if you were to like navigate to one of these folders, it's not using the letter I, it's using Parallax, / files like this. Really? So it's going to these specific locations. But again, the cool thing is we use PX tools to set up all of our network locations. And you'll come to find out if you talk to a lot of these companies that use drive letters, it's because it's easy to set up. So you can take it off IT's hands and offer to do it consistently with PX tools. And what that'll mean for them is it's one less thing they have to try to manage with like a group policy or, a batch file that runs at user login, which is the most ghetto thing I've seen so far, but I have seen that in a lot of offices. And so ours, that's just called a definition. We have a definition that's just called Parallax team. And essentially, it happens right here. So I lied. There they are. So here it is, just making our network locations again, and it's got a location wildcard in there because all of our servers do have different names. So it's pretty neat in how it works. It also does some really interesting stuff. I don't know if you noticed, but our employee handbook showed up on the desktop. And I used to do this in a former office because they had trouble with claimed lack of access to things like employee handbooks. So this is really kind of creepy and Big Brother-ish, but if you delete it, it just comes back tomorrow. This is kind of funny. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's basically, what I was going to show you is what we ran on this machine to get it fully set up was the package called BIM VM demo. And I just made this one this morning. It's called virtual machine demo. And I made that because we didn't obviously have time to run everything. So if we ran this one, it was going to take all day, takes all day, takes all day, even our normal VM. So this is our normal Revit VM that we use for testing. It takes all day. So VM demo only had Revit and AutoCAD and a couple of add-ins. So we ran that. But what's important about this is the disparity between us who know how these things work and IT who want to be responsible for the systems but don't know how any of these things work. So here's where things get cool. The shortcut that was called setup VM demo, this is the entirety of this shortcut right there. So if we just break it, if we make this wider so you can see it, all it's doing is launch PowerShell with no profile, no logo, no exit, bypass the execution policy, and go to the PX Tools script and look for VM demo in the location of Office. Now, here's why that's important. You only ever run a setup file on a computer once. So set up this computer as VM demo, set up a FlexLM desktop, set up a single sign-on desktop. Forever, after the machine has been set up, the only command you ever run is conform. And conform is that command that does that crazy thing where it says, let me compare the current set list to, what's installed on the machine, and let's see what it does. So just like as an example, this is a full VM that has like everything on it already, right? But I was telling you earlier in the demo, this machine is older. Like the Parallax apps are not up to date. Enscape's probably not up to date and 2021 doesn't even have 0.1 because I made this VM like 6 months ago. So now I don't even worry about checking what's installed on this machine and what's not. I just come in and bust out a conform and let it figure it out. So if I were going to do this for real, I would just come in and run this thing. And I just, like, you'll notice I'm not even looking to see what it needs to run. And all this info that pops up at the beginning, it's not going to tell you what needs to run yet, but it says, this is the current status of this set. This is my set list. I'm going to match this. And yeah, sure, looks cool. I'm going to just hit enter and let it go. And so there'll be a bunch of things that it's going to skip. Okay, so Civil 3D 2021.0.1. That's funny because I didn't even realize I had put that on the server, but apparently there's an update for Civil 3D. So it's just going to run. But what's special about this is, as the BIM person, I would get the deployments on the server and get them all built and get everything ready to conform. And then I would send IT this line. And I would tell them, look, whatever you want to do, if you want me to run around to every machine and double click conform, I'll do it. That's fine. And I do that for some of our clients. I fly there and do that. And that's the slowest, that's the worst case scenario, which still, ironically, I can update an office of 150 machines by myself in a night and a half. But the cool thing is they can send this command however they want. One client actually double dips. They pay for PX tools and PDQ, and they use PDQ just to send this command. Or you can SCCM this command, you can GPO this command, you can login script this command. That's a little dangerous, but you can. And the neat thing is that means I don't have to ever have a conversation with IT where I'm saying you need to install 2021.1 and Kiwi Codes version 6 and Dynamo 2.11. Like I don't ever have to have that conversation. The conversation then just becomes IT conform. And they're like, yeah, cool, because they don't want to get in all of our business. I'm a bit nervous looking at this right now because I just realized I've edited a bunch of these. Like that one's red. And I'm like, what did I change in here? Let's just not save anything. No. Okay. So that's it in a nutshell. It's been super valuable. I mean, Gordon has been building PX tools since I think 2011. And I think the older versions of it were like VB scripts, and they were hilarious. Like they did not match a set. They were task based like SCCM, but he's been doing this for coming up on 10 years now, and it's really kind of changed the way we did machines. So I have the whole point of the discussion today is there's a new machine sitting on a desk over there with the side of the case off. I don't know if you can all see it behind the 8 million boxes. And there's another new machine that's on the way. So I use these VMs basically for testing. And so now that we have that full conform running, oh geez, there was a Max update too. That's hilarious. This is the whole point, by the way. Like sometimes like in the middle of the year, you're like, oh my gosh, a Max update. You download it, you put it on the server, and then you forget to install it. So it's hitting all those things now. And after I'm happy with how this test VM goes, I will go over there, double click that one, and the full run will take about 6 hours. And that's just because we install like a truckload of software. And by morning, it'll be fully done, ready to go. So that's kind of our oh man, I missed all these great comments. Yes, 100% crosshairs. I'm totally with you, and I think mine just aren't like that because I don't really draw in AutoCAD anymore. I open AutoCAD just to like look. I have to go look now. What are my crosshairs on? Are they small, or were mine on the 100%? I don't remember. Moment of truth. I have to know. Oh, I have them turned off. I don't even remember how to do it. All right. Well, yeah, I'm with you. I used to have them on 100%, but I don't draw on AutoCAD anymore. I use AutoCAD for like cleaning stuff up and validating some field layout stuff and things of that nature. But so anyways, here's the deal. I hope PX tools, I hope learning about it, if it's new to you, I hope it was valuable. One of the things I always tell potential users or whatever is, you know, our definitions files show all of what we customize inside Revit or inside AutoCAD or Navisworks or whatever, but you would still have to buy PX tools to get the value of it. And of course, you'd have to edit the definitions files because they all have our server address, which won't work. But I mean, it does such a good job. And we've listed out all the major customizations for all of the software that if anybody out there does end up getting a license of PX tools for your office, shoot me an email after the fact and I'll just send you our definitions files and you can butcher them and copy and paste to your heart's content until you get your definitions built. Because when we recommend it to our customers now, they buy PX tools and then they sometimes just pay us to set it up because they're like, yeah, we love the advantages it brings, but we still don't want to learn how to do it ourselves. And I'm like, that's cool. So we fly to some contents or some customers' offices and just do it for them. Because again, if you're building nice content libraries and building nice templates and awesome applications and nice Dynamo graphs, and you're helping, you know, train staff, but then their IT group butchers their installs, they're going to have a miserable existence anyway, and they're not going to get the value out of your tools. So we kind of just help people knock this out. But if any of you end up using PX tools and you want to just compare notes on definitions files, just shoot us an email. I'll totally send you ours after I strip out like our serial numbers and stuff. So anyways, hopefully you guys got something out of that. So Josh says, I love PX tools, best value. I totally agree. So you also use PDQ. That's awesome. Oh, warranty info and everything. That's great. I was hesitant. You know what? I'm a minute over, but I am going to mention this. I told Gordon I wouldn't mention this quite yet because he's not ready to go with it. But Gordon has a new feature he's working on specifically related to COVID. And it's really cool because I didn't do, so whenever we do this lecture, we have to decide between going really in depth on the deployments themselves or going really in depth on the PX tools. And this lecture was more the PX tools, but imagine if you were going to build a Revit deployment and you were going to path it to the C drive. So the deployment lived on the C drive and it ran off the C drive. Gordon's working on a version of PX tools where you'll build all your deployments pathed to the C drive and then store them somewhere on the internet like Amazon. And then PX tools will pull them down from Amazon one at a time, wait until they're fully downloaded, run them on the machine, and then delete them. It'll actually mean you can do deployments during work from home. You'll still be at the mercy of everybody's internet speed. If their internet sucks, like Revit's going to take 9 hours. But here's the difference. When you try to do it across the VPN, the 9 hours is because the deployment is trying to run across the VPN and it always fails on something. What he's going to do is have it do the entire download first, then run locally, then delete it, which is going to actually work. It's really cool. It's not out yet though. He's not done with it. He's still working on it. Yeah, absolutely. So Heinrich, I mean, like I said, reach out about that kind of stuff. I mean, this is the thing is there's so much customization on the Autodesk and Bluebeam and whatever side that you really can't. It's easy to want to blame an IT group, but the reality is if they're not BIM experts, they won't know how to customize all this stuff. And I actually like to hang out on Reddit in the sysadmin subreddit, which is just where all the IT system administrators who do like serious IT stuff hang out. And once every few weeks, an Autodesk post pops up there and they're like, what the hell are we supposed to do with this? Like they want this crazy thing and it does this other thing. And in their defense, like I read threads over there that I have no idea about. Like they're dealing with security and, malware and server support. And, I mean, managing Autodesk software is like a whole nother expertise that they would have to dive into. So it's just one of those things they couldn't even know if they had to. So by all means, let them know that like this could help them, and you can help them get it set up, and then they can continue holding the keys to the castle so that you don't have to have like domain admin rights and you're just setting up the PX tools for them, and they'll probably love you for it. Anyways, I know it's super late for some of you, and it's Friday for hopefully all of us. So that was basically everything I wanted to go over. If y'all have any more questions, feel free to email or reach out on Twitter or whatever else. And if you ever need any help with deployment stuff, we're here all the time. And like I said, it's the unsexy stuff of BIM, but I enjoy it in a masochistic, sad kind of way. So with that, everybody have a good weekend, and talk to you later.